A phone screen flickers to life on rain-soaked asphalt, rain hitting it in sharp, uneven bursts. 31 missed calls, all from one name, Solange. A single voicemail, marked urgent. Jae Hwan looks at the screen for exactly 2 seconds. Then he turns it face down and leans closer to the woman sitting next to him, a woman who was not his wife. Now here's what you need to understand. At that exact moment, 11:52 p.m., on a side street 3 blocks from the Han River, his wife was on the pavement, 50 years old, bleeding, one hand gripping the twisted frame of her motorcycle, the other still holding her phone. She had already called him 31 times, not screaming, not panicking, just calling, because she believed, even now, he would answer. He didn't, and by the time Jae Hwan finally picked up his phone, at 3:18 in the morning, Solange was still alive. But the woman who loved him wasn't, and the child she had been carrying didn't make it. He would never know what she sounded like when she stopped calling. Now sit with that for a second, because this isn't the story of a man who lost his wife. This is the story of a man who lost access to her while she was still breathing. So how does the most feared man in Seoul's underground, a man who can open any door with a single call, end up locked out of the only one that ever mattered? It starts 4 hours earlier, with a choice he told himself didn't matter. Let's talk about Jae Hwan for a moment, because you need to understand the kind of man who looked at 31 missed calls and still turned his phone face down. Jae Hwan wasn't the loudest man in any room. He didn't need to be. At 32, he controlled a network that moved money, people, and silence through half of Seoul's underground. He never raised his voice. He never repeated himself. And when he entered a room, something shifted. Not because people feared what he might do, but because they feared what it meant to be nothing to him. Being ignored by Jae Hwan was worse than being destroyed by anyone else. Now let's talk about Solange. Because if you think this is the story of a woman who was too weak to be left alone, you don't understand her at all. Solange wasn't fragile. She wasn't the kind of woman who waited to be chosen. At 50, she had already built a life most people spend decades chasing. And then she walked away from it. Not because she had to, because she chose to. The tattoos came later, not as rebellion, as reclamation. Every line on her skin was a decision no one else got to make for her. And the motorcycles, they weren't a phase, they were freedom. The kind of freedom you only look for after you've already lost something you can't get back. She didn't ride because it was dangerous. She rode because she wasn't afraid anymore. And somewhere along the way, she became something most men around Jae Hwan didn't know how to handle. A woman who could walk away, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. And when a woman like that leaves, she doesn't come back the same. And that's the part Jae Hwan never understood. Not when he met her, not when he married her, and definitely not on the night she called him 31 times and he chose not to answer. Let's go back to that night, because everything that came after, every consequence, every silence, every door that would never open again, started here. At 7:12 p.m., Jae Hwan stepped through a matte black door tucked into a side street in Gangnam, the kind of place that didn't exist on maps and didn't need to. No sign, no music spilling out, No crowd, just a quiet room, low amber light, and conversations that never had to be loud to carry weight. This was where decisions were made, and once they were made, they stayed made. He was exactly where he wanted to be, in control, untouched, unreachable. At 7:14 p.m., 2 districts away, Solange adjusted the strap of her helmet and kicked her motorcycle to life. The engine turned over once, then settled. Not loud, not reckless, just precise, steady, controlled, like her. She pulled into the street just as the first line of rain began to trace itself across the pavement. Back in the lounge, a glass was placed in Jae Hwan's hand without him asking. Top shelf, the kind of detail people got right when they knew who you were. He didn't look at it. He didn't need to. In his world, things arrived before he asked for them. Doors opened before he reached them. Problems solved themselves before they were spoken out loud. That was power. Out on the road, the rain picked up. Light at first, then steady, then enough to blur the edges of headlights and turn the asphalt slick under her tires. Solange didn't slow down. She adjusted, shifted her weight, stayed in control. At 8:03 p.m., his phone buzzed. Once, he didn't reach for it. At 8:04, it buzzed again. This time he glanced down. A name lit the screen. Solange. He saw it. He knew exactly who it was, and he let it ring. At 8:05, she called again, and again. The calls began to stack, one over the other, each one adding to the last, until the silence between them started to feel less like a pause and more like something breaking. At 8:09 p.m., her rear tire slipped. Not a dramatic skid, not a cinematic crash, just a moment, a fraction of a second where control gave way. The bike slid. Metal hit asphalt with a sharp, tearing sound, and then everything slowed into that strange, suspended quiet that comes after impact. Back in the lounge, someone laughed. Glasses touched. A deal was closing. Months of quiet negotiation, finally settling into agreement. At 8:10 p.m., Jae Hwan reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. 6 missed calls, same name. For a moment, something shifted. Not enough to change anything, just enough to register. He turned the phone in his hand, watched the screen, considered. Then he placed it face down on the table, muted. Out in the rain, Solange tried to move. Her breath caught, sharp, uneven, controlled by force more than calm. One hand braced against the pavement, the other searching until her fingers closed around her phone. She didn't scream. She didn't panic. She focused. At 8:12, she called him again. Back in the lounge, the woman beside Jae Hwan leaned closer, her voice low, meant only for him. The kind of conversation that made the rest of the room disappear if you let it. He listened, and he stayed. At 8:17, her voice finally broke. Not loudly, not in a way anyone else would hear, just enough to slip into a voicemail. Thin, strained, controlled, a message that would sit unheard long past the moment it mattered. At 8:21, she stopped calling. The rain didn't. The city didn't. Everything else kept moving. But that ended. Back in the lounge, Jae Hwan didn't notice, because by then, the decision had already been made. And that's the thing about decisions like that. They don't feel like endings when you make them. They feel small, temporary, fixable, like something you can come back to when the moment is more convenient. Until they're not. Jae Hwan left the lounge at 3:11 a.m. The deal was done. The room had emptied, and the night had settled into that quiet, controlled calm that follows a decision going exactly as planned. His phone was still in his pocket, on silent. He checked it in the car. 31 missed calls, 1 voicemail, all from Solange. For a moment, he just looked at the screen, not panicked, not yet, as if his mind needed a second longer to understand what his eyes were already showing him. He called back. No answer. He called again. Nothing. The drive should have taken 12 minutes. He made it in 7. The street was still wet, rain clinging to the pavement and breaking the light into scattered reflections that shifted as cars passed. At first, he didn't see anything unusual. And then he did. The motorcycle lay on its side. The frame, twisted, metal, scraped raw against the asphalt like something that had been dragged further than it should have been. A few feet away, there was blood. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was just real. Dark, uneven, already thinning under the rain. Jae Hwan stopped. For the first time that night, he didn't move forward. Her phone was still there, screen cracked, face down. He picked it up, turned it over, and saw his own name reflected back at him. Call after call after call, stacked on top of each other like something that had been trying to reach him and never did. For a moment, nothing happened. There was no anger, no panic, just a kind of silence that didn't come from the street around him, but from somewhere inside him, shutting down all at once. "Sir," the voice came from behind him, low, controlled, professional. He turned. Paramedics. One of them stepped forward, measured, careful, used to moments like this and the way they changed people. "She's alive." A pause. "She was conscious when we got here." Jae Hwan didn't speak. "She's been taken to Seoul National University Hospital." Another pause. Slightly longer this time, just enough to carry weight. "And the pregnancy." The medic hesitated. Not long, just enough to be noticed. Jae Hwan's eyes lifted. "We're sorry." The world didn't stop. The rain didn't stop. Cars kept moving. Lights kept shifting across the pavement. Somewhere, someone laughed. Everything continued exactly as it had before, except something had been removed from it. Cleanly, permanently, Jae Hwan stood there, in the middle of a street he could have bought, controlled, erased, holding a broken phone in his hand, and understood something for the first time in years. This wasn't a problem he could solve. Not with money, not with influence, not with time. Because the moment that mattered had already passed. The drive to the hospital took 11 minutes. Jae Hwan made it in 7. He walked through the emergency entrance at 4:06 a.m., still wearing the same suit, still carrying the same silence he had chosen hours earlier. The corridor was bright, too bright, fluorescent lights reflecting off polished floors, the quiet hum of machines somewhere behind closed doors, and the controlled movement of people who had learned how to function inside other people's worst moments. A doctor was already waiting. Dr. Park Min-ji. She didn't bow. She didn't soften her expression. She looked at him the way someone looks at a situation, not a person. "Mr. Jae Hwan," her voice was steady, professional. "Your wife was admitted at approximately 9:02 p.m. with multiple injuries following a road accident." He didn't respond. "She remained conscious during transport." A pause. "She is currently in recovery. Stable." Another pause. Slightly longer. The pregnancy? Dr. Park stopped for a second, not to dramatize, to confirm. There was significant trauma. Silence. We were unable to save the child. Nothing moved. Not the lights, not the people passing behind him, not even the air in the corridor. Jae Hwan stood there and took the information the way he had taken every piece of information his entire life, without reaction. "Where is my wife?" Dr. Park held his gaze, measured, direct. "Mrs. Solange is conscious." A pause. "She has requested that you not be admitted to her room." Let that sit for a moment. The most powerful man in his world, a man who could open any door with a call, change outcomes with a sentence, and control everything around him, was standing in a hospital corridor being told he could not see his own wife. Not because of policy, not because of security, because she said no. The same way he had said no every time her phone rang. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't call anyone. For a moment, it looked like he might, like the version of him everyone else in this city knew was about to step in and fix it. But nothing happened. He sat down. A plastic chair against a white hospital wall, under lights that made everything look the same. And for the first time in years, Jae Hwan didn't reach for control. He didn't reach for power. He didn't reach for anything at all. He just stayed. Not for a deal to close, not for a call to come in, but for someone who might never let him in again. And that was where the real story began. But here's where the real story begins. Because losing something, that's tragedy. What you do after the loss, that's character. When morning broke through the hospital windows, Jae Hwan was still in the chair. Same suit, same blood-dark silence around him, same phone in his hand. The phone he had turned face down. Now he held it like it might turn back time if he stared at it long enough. It didn't. At 7:03 a.m., Min Jun, his right hand, arrived at the hospital. He had served Jae Hwan for 9 years, long enough to know when to speak, and when silence was the only safe thing left, he carried a garment bag, a black coffee, and a leather folder Jae Hwan had not asked for. Min Jun placed the folder on the chair beside him. The Busan Port Group confirmed the signing dinner. He said quietly, "They're asking whether tonight still stands. Director Han wants..." "Cancel it." Min Jun stopped. "Sir, that agreement took 8 months to..." "I said cancel it." There was no volume in Jae Hwan's voice. That was what made it worse. Min Jun looked at him, then at the hospital doors, behind which Solange was breathing, alive but unreachable. And he understood. He picked up the folder. "Yes, sir." At 1:26 p.m., a nurse approached. She was young, maybe 26, and she held the clipboard with both hands like it might protect her from the man sitting in front of her. "Mr. Jae Hwan." He looked up. "Mrs. Solange has authorized one controlled viewing." A pause. "You are not permitted to enter the room." Another pause. "You may stand at the observation window for 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Supervised, through glass. Phase 1 had begun, and Jae Hwan didn't even know the rules yet. He followed the nurse down the corridor, past closed doors, past quiet medical stations, past families whispering prayers into paper cups of vending machine coffee. He walked behind her the way men usually walk behind him, waiting, following, receiving permission. At the end of the corridor, the nurse stopped. She pointed toward a reinforced observation window. "Please remain here." Through the glass, he saw her, Solange, She was awake. That was the first thing that hit him. Not the bandages, not the monitors, not the bruising along one side of her face, or the cast holding her left wrist still. Her eyes were open. She was alive, but she didn't look at him. Not once. Her silver-streaked hair was pushed back from her face. The tattooed skin of her shoulder disappeared beneath the edge of the hospital gown. One hand rested against the blanket, still and bruised. The same hand that had held the phone while she called him 31 times. Jae Hwan stood on the other side of the glass and watched the woman he had failed breathe without him. He didn't touch the window. He didn't speak. He didn't ask the nurse to tell her he was there, because she knew. Of course she knew. And still, she did not turn her head. 15 minutes. That was all he was given. 15 minutes to look at the woman who had once crossed rooms toward him as if love were a place she had chosen to live. 15 minutes to understand that now even her silence had a locked door inside it. When the time was up, the nurse stepped closer. "Mr. Jae Hwan." He nodded before she finished and walked away. No argument, no request, no name dropped, no call made. For 3 days, he followed the protocol. 15 minutes at the observation window, twice a day, no entry, no direct contact, no messages delivered unless approved by staff. He showed up. He stood. He watched. He left. On the 4th day, Solange agreed to communicate, not face to face, through her attorney. Yes, her attorney. Within 48 hours of waking up, Solange had contacted a family lawyer. Not for divorce, not yet. For structure, for boundaries, for control. The one thing Jae Hwan had taken from her on the night she needed him most. Attorney Han Soo-jin was waiting in a hospital conference room when Jae Hwan arrived. Silver hair cut blunt at her jaw, black suit, no jewelry except a wedding band, and a watch that looked older than most people's careers. In Seoul's legal circles, they called her the architect because she did not negotiate feelings. She built walls, and once she built them, men like Jae Hwan learned very quickly what doors were for. She did not rise when he entered. She did not bow. She gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit, Mr. Jae Hwan." He sat. Attorney Han opened the folder in front of her. "Mrs. Solange has authorized a staged access structure." A pause. "Limited, conditional, revocable." Jae Hwan said nothing. "She is willing to allow controlled access to medical updates and eventually limited communication under the following conditions." She looked up. "These are non-negotiable." Jae Hwan had negotiated with politicians, port owners, debt brokers, prosecutors, and men who believed violence was a language. But nothing had ever felt like this, because there was nothing to buy, nothing to threaten, nothing to move. Attorney Han turned the first page. Condition 1. All visits are supervised, no exceptions, no substitutions. A pause. You appear personally at the approved time, or access is revoked. Condition 2. You will not contact Mrs. Solange directly. No calls, no messages, no gifts, no handwritten letters sent through staff. Another pause. If she chooses to receive words from you, that will happen through this office. Condition 3. Yoon Mira is to have zero contact with you, your household, your business network, Mrs. Solange, or anyone connected to Mrs. Solange's recovery. Jae Hwan's eyes changed. Not much. Enough, Attorney Han noticed. Any verified breach resets all progress to 0. Condition 4. You will attend a structured counseling program. Her voice stayed even. Weekly, verified, not voluntary, not symbolic, not at your convenience. Condition 5, you will not use your network, your influence, your money, your security, your employees, or any third party to monitor, pressure, locate, persuade, accelerate, or manipulate this process. She let the sentence settle. In any way. Silence. Jae Hwan looked at the document, then at Attorney Han, then back at the document. For most of his life, every contract placed in front of him had been an opening move, a thing to test, to bend, to improve in his favor. But this was not a negotiation. This was a consequence. I agree. No hesitation, no counteroffer, no condition of his own. Attorney Han studied him for a long moment. Mr. Jae Hwan, I have represented women against men like you for 23 years. A pause. They all agree quickly. He did not look away. The question is whether you will still agree in week 6. Another pause. When your pride gets tired, when your grief starts looking for shortcuts, when you decide that because you are suffering, you deserve access. Jae Hwan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Attorney Han closed the folder. Mrs. Solange does not owe you closeness because you regret what happened. She leaned back slightly. She does not owe you softness because you are finally afraid. And honestly, that is the question I want you to think about too. If you were Solange, if the person you trusted most saw your name on his phone and chose another room, another woman, another life, would conditions ever be enough? Or would the door already be closed? Phase 1 was designed to break him. And it almost did. Every morning, Jae Hwan arrived at the hospital at exactly 8 a.m. No driver, no entourage, no black-suited men waiting near the elevator. Solange's conditions required him to come alone, arrive on time, and leave when told. So he did. The hospital staff began to recognize him. At first, they treated him the way the Whisper Network said they should. A powerful man, a careless husband. The reason a 50-year-old woman had been found bleeding in the rain beside a motorcycle with 31 unanswered calls on her phone. Nurses avoided unnecessary conversation. Doctors kept updates clinical and brief. No one softened for him, and he did not ask them to. He learned her schedule, not because anyone invited him to, because it was the only thing he was allowed to know. Medication times, physical therapy hours, neurological checks. The days her pain was worse, the mornings she refused visitors entirely. He memorized everything, not to control it, because he had nothing else. And every day, twice a day, he stood behind the glass. 15 minutes, then 12, then sometimes 5. If Solange decided she was done being seen. That was part of the agreement too. Access could shrink. Access could vanish. And he had no right to complain. On the 6th day, she turned her head, not toward him, toward the window, just enough that he knew she had chosen to acknowledge the space where he stood. Not him, the space. It was the smallest possible movement, and it hit him harder than any threat ever had. Because for the first time in his life, Jae Hwan understood the difference between being seen and being allowed in. For the next 3 weeks, Jae Hwan followed the protocol. Exactly. No improvisation, no pressure, no quiet calls made through people who owed him favors. He arrived when he was told. He stood where he was told. He left when he was told. And for a man like Jae Hwan, that was not obedience. That was surgery. Because every day something inside him had to be cut away before he could stand in that hallway and not reach for control. Every morning, he arrived at exactly 8 a.m. Not 7:58, not 8:03:8. He wore plain clothes now, no tailored black suits, no polished shoes that announced power before he entered a room, no driver waiting outside the hospital entrance, no security men watching the corners. Solange's conditions required him to come alone, so he came alone. The nurses noticed. At first, they treated him like what the story said he was, a Korean Mafia boss who had let his 50-year-old wife bleed in the rain while he sat beside another woman. They did not say that to his face. They didn't have to. It was in the way they kept their answers short, the way their eyes moved past him, the way no one asked if he needed anything, because he didn't, not compared to her. Doctors gave him updates only when permitted, clinical, brief, controlled. Her pain was managed overnight. She completed 6 minutes of assisted walking. She refused breakfast. She slept for 2 hours. She requested no viewing today. That last one happened more than once, and every time Jae Hwan nodded, not because it didn't hurt, because hurting did not entitle him to make himself the center of what he had done. But here's the part that matters. Jae Hwan kept coming. Rain or clear, deal or no deal, access or no access. There were mornings when he arrived and was told Solange had revoked the viewing window for the day. He still sat in the corridor. There were afternoons when he was told she had approved only 5 minutes. He took the 5. There were days when all he received was one sentence from the nurse. She is stable. And somehow, that had to be enough. He learned the hospital without owning it. That was new. He learned which elevator moved fastest after shift change. He learned which vending machine always took coins, but not cards. He learned that the hallway outside Solange's recovery unit grew colder after midnight because the automatic doors opened every time an ambulance team came through. He learned the sound of her monitor from outside the room. Not because anyone taught him, because when all you are allowed to do is wait, you learn the shape of waiting. And then came the hardest part. Not the glass, not the silence, not even the way Solange refused to look at him for 11 straight days. The hardest part came from his mother. Madam Choi Un-kyung called on the 22nd morning. Jae Hwan let the phone ring twice before answering. He had avoided her since the accident. Not because he feared anyone, because there were some voices that could make even powerful men feel like sons again. You have brought disgrace on this family. Her voice was calm. That made it worse. Jae Hwan said nothing. Not because of the woman. She continued. A pause. I warned you when you married a woman older than you. I warned you when she refused to behave like the wives in our circle. I warned you when she covered her skin in ink and started riding motorcycles like a girl with nothing left to lose. Another pause. But I was wrong about what mattered. Jae Hwan closed his eyes. She was your wife. The words landed clean. She was carrying your child. Another pause. And you left her alone. He did not defend himself. There was nothing to defend. In my generation, his mother said, a man who did that would not be welcomed at his own father's funeral. Still, he said nothing. Fix this. Her voice sharpened. Not for your name, not for your pride, not because people are whispering. Fix this because that woman survived something no one should have survived alone, and because a child died before anyone in this family had the honor of knowing her. Jae Hwan's hand tightened around the phone. They did not ask for a man like you, his mother said. Then The line went dead. And here's the part that made this different from every apology tour a powerful man has ever attempted. Jae Hwan didn't try to fix it with money. He didn't send diamonds. He didn't send flowers. He didn't send a private chef to prepare food she didn't ask for, or a designer coat to keep her warm in a hospital room where she had already learned how cold his absence could be. He didn't buy a new motorcycle. He didn't replace the broken one. He didn't even offer, because replacing what was destroyed is not the same thing as repairing what was broken. He just kept showing up. By the end of week 4, the hospital staff no longer looked surprised when he arrived. They did not soften exactly. That would have been too easy. But something changed. A nurse who had once answered him in single words began giving him full sentences. A physical therapist mentioned that Solange had stood for 9 minutes that morning instead of 6. A resident told him she had asked for ginger tea and then refused it when it arrived too sweet. Small things, almost nothing. But when you have lost access to everything, almost nothing becomes something. The head nurse on Solange's floor was a woman named Nurse Bayek, 58 years old, 31 years in trauma recovery. A woman who had seen every version of guilt walk into a hospital corridor and call itself love. She did not impress easily, and she did not forgive on behalf of patients. On the 29th day, Nurse Bayek wrote a note in the patient liaison report. It was short, professional, nothing emotional. Husband demonstrates consistent punctual presence, no attempts to override patient restrictions, no unauthorized contact, complies with all access limitations, recommend review for Phase 2 communication. That report went to Attorney Han. Attorney Han read it once, then twice. Then she sent it to Solange. Solange read it alone, not in the hospital bed. By then, she had been moved to a private rehabilitation room with a window facing the city and a chair she refused to let anyone help her into unless she asked first. Her left wrist was still braced. Her ribs still hurt when she breathed too deeply. The stitches along her shoulder pulled whenever she turned, but she could sit up now. She could hold a pen. And when she reached the sentence, husband demonstrates consistent punctual presence, she stopped. Not at husband, not at presence, at consistent. She read the word 3 times. Then she circled it. Once, hard enough that the pen almost tore through the paper. Because in all the years she had loved Jae Hwan, that word had never belonged to him. Not as a husband, not as a partner, not when she was the one waiting at dinner tables, not when she was the one sleeping beside a man whose mind was always somewhere else. Not when she had learned to stop asking what time he would be home because the answer never meant anything. Consistent. It was a small word, an ordinary word, the kind of word people use for weather or medication or someone who remembers to water plants. But to Solange, it was the first piece of evidence that regret had not burned out after the first few days. And that mattered. Not enough to forgive him, not enough to see him, not enough to open the door, but enough to not close it tighter. The next morning, Attorney Han called Jae Hwan into the same hospital conference room. Same table, same 2 chairs, same woman who looked at him like she was measuring whether he had mistaken endurance for progress. Mrs. Solange has reviewed the liaison report. Jae Hwan said nothing. She has authorized Phase 2. For the first time in weeks, his face changed. Not much, but enough. Attorney Han lifted one finger. Do not misunderstand this. A pause. This is not forgiveness. He nodded. It is not trust. Another pause. It is not reconciliation. I understand. No, Attorney Han said. You hope you understand. She opened the folder. Phase 2 permits written communication only. 1 message per week. Maximum 200 words. Submitted through this office. Mrs. Solange may read it, ignore it, return it unopened, or revoke the privilege entirely. Jae Hwan looked at the paper. 200 words, once a week, through an attorney. The most feared man in Seoul's underground had been reduced to a word limit, and he accepted it. What should I say? He asked. It was the first question he had asked that did not sound like a command. Attorney Han studied him, then closed the folder. That is not my problem. And she was right, because apologies are easy when someone else tells you where to put the pain. The hard part is learning how to speak when the person you broke owes you absolutely nothing in return. That night, Jae Hwan sat alone in his apartment with a blank page in front of him. Not the penthouse, not the estate. An apartment near the hospital with rented furniture and a couch too narrow for a man who had spent his life taking up space. He wrote 3 words, then crossed them out. He wrote a sentence, destroyed it. He sat there for 2 hours trying to find language for something language could not repair. Finally, he wrote, Solange, I will not ask you to forgive me. I will not ask you to see me. I will not ask you to believe I am different because I am ashamed. I only want you to know that I am here, and I will keep being here, even if being here never gives me the right to stand beside you again. 157 words. He counted them twice, then sealed the page. The next day, Attorney Han delivered it. Solange accepted the envelope. She did not open it. Not in front of the attorney. Not that day, not the next. For 3 days, the envelope sat on the table beside her bed. White paper, black ink, a closed thing, like him. On the 4th night, Solange opened it. She read it once, then folded it back exactly the way it had come. No tears, no smile, no answer. But she did not throw it away. And for Jae Hwan, though no one told him that was the beginning of phase 2. Not because he had earned anything, but because for the first time, Solange had allowed his words to exist in the same room as her pain. Now, you didn't think Yoon Mira would just disappear, did you? Because the most dangerous people in stories like this are not always the ones who attack directly. Sometimes they wait. Sometimes they smile. Sometimes they rearrange the board while everyone else is still looking at the wound. Yoon Mira had been quiet since the night of the accident. Strategically quiet. She knew what had happened. Everyone in their circle knew. The whisper network among Seoul's elite moved faster than any news outlet. And by the end of the 2nd day, there was not a private club, executive dining room, or imported whiskey bar where Jae Hwan's name had not been spoken in lowered voices. Jae Hwan's wife nearly died in the rain, his 50-year-old wife, the one with the tattoos, the one people had always called too much because they did not know what to do with a woman who refused to shrink. She had been found beside a broken motorcycle with 31 unanswered calls on her phone, and he had been with Yoon Mira. The details shifted depending on who told the story. The judgment did not. But Mira was not concerned with judgment. Judgment was temporary. Position was not. You need to understand something about Yoon Mira. She was not a random woman in a black dress. She was not some careless affair who had wandered into a powerful man's orbit because she liked danger. No, Mira was the daughter of a former prosecutor, educated in London, polished in Seoul, and useful in the specific way ambitious men mistake for loyalty. She knew how to open doors without appearing to touch the handle. She knew which minister's brother owed a favor, which hotel license was vulnerable, which development group wanted protection but needed it called consulting. For 6 months, she had been building herself into Jae Hwan's business life, not through seduction. That would have been too obvious for a man who distrusted obvious things. She built herself through utility, introductions, information, quiet solutions, problems solved before Jae Hwan had to ask. And somewhere along the way, between late-night strategy calls, private tables, and conversations that started as business and ended as confession, she had made herself feel necessary. That was the danger. Not that Jae Hwan loved her. He didn't. Not really. But he had let her become convenient. And convenience, for a man afraid of emotional responsibility, can become more dangerous than desire. Mira knew that. She also knew that if Jae Hwan stayed in that hospital corridor long enough, if guilt turned into routine, if routine turned into change, then everything she had built around him would collapse. Not romantically, professionally, socially, strategically. The Busan Port Agreement was still open. The luxury import channel still needed signatures. 3 men from the Coastal Development Group were still waiting for Jae Hwan to return to the table. And Mira had positioned herself as the bridge he would need to cross to get back there. So she made a move. Not toward him. She was smarter than that. She contacted Director Han. "I understand the situation has become complicated," she said over coffee in a private room overlooking the river. Director Han did not smile. "Complicated is one word." Mira lowered her eyes just enough to look respectful without looking weak. "Family matters are delicate, of course, but agreements of this size do not stay warm forever." Director Han watched her. "Kang canceled, personally." "Yes," Mira said, "and emotionally I understand why." That word, emotionally, was placed carefully, like bait. But his absence is creating uncertainty. Investors do not like uncertainty. Neither do port authorities. She paused. "I can keep the group aligned until he is ready to re-engage." What she really meant was simple. If Jae Hwan wanted the deal back, he would have to come through her. If he wanted the room back, he would have to sit beside her again. If he wanted his old life to keep its shape, she would be waiting inside it. Useful, patient, necessary. But Mira made one critical miscalculation. She assumed Jae Hwan's guilt was temporary. She assumed the pattern would hold. She assumed that once the first shock passed, once the hospital lights became too harsh, once Solange's silence became too humiliating, he would return to the only version of himself he had ever known how to be. The man who chose power when love asked for presence. She was wrong, and the proof of that was sitting in a rehabilitation corridor, learning how to fold a hospital blanket correctly. Solange was getting stronger, slowly, painfully. Not in the clean, inspiring way people like to imagine recovery. There were no perfect montages, no sudden return to herself. Some mornings, she could sit up for 20 minutes. Some mornings, 5 was too much. Her left wrist remained braced. 2 ribs were cracked. Her shoulder had been stitched from the impact, and the bruising along her hip turned from black to purple to yellow in a way that made Jae Hwan look away the first time he saw it. Not because he was disgusted, because he understood that her body had kept the record of every second he had ignored. On week 6, Attorney Han called him into the conference room again. Same table, same folder, same woman who never wasted a sentence. Jae Hwan sat down. He did not ask why he was there. He had learned that asking for answers before they were offered was just another kind of reaching. Mrs. Solange has authorized Phase 3. Jae Hwan's hand stilled on the table. Not much. Enough. Attorney Han noticed. Do not mistake this for forgiveness. I won't. Do not mistake it for trust. I won't. And do not mistake proximity for progress. A pause. Being allowed into the room does not mean you have been allowed back into her life. He nodded. The rules are precise. She opened the folder. You may enter the rehabilitation room twice per week. 20 minutes per visit. A nurse or approved staff member will be present at all times. She turned the page. You will not touch her unless she asks. Another page. You will not discuss the accident unless she initiates. Another page. You will not apologize repeatedly in an attempt to receive emotional relief. Jae Hwan looked up. Attorney Han held his gaze. Yes, she said. That needed to be written. Silence. You will assist only when instructed. You will leave when told. If she ends the visit early, you will not ask why. A pause. And if you use this access to pressure her, comfort yourself, or perform remorse instead of respecting her recovery, Phase 3 ends immediately. Jae Hwan looked at the document. Then he said the only thing there was to say. I agree. Attorney Han leaned back. Of course you do. Not cruel, not kind, just accurate. The first visit happened that afternoon. 2 p.m. room 614. A rehabilitation room with pale walls, a narrow bed, a folded walker, and a window that looked out over a city that had kept moving without asking anyone's permission. Solange was sitting upright in a chair, not lying down, not hidden beneath blankets, sitting. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back. The hospital gown had been replaced with a loose black robe that covered most of the bruising, but not the tattoos along her collarbone. Dark ink rising beneath the fabric, like something that refused to be erased. She did not look surprised to see him. That made it worse. A nurse stood near the door, Nurse Bayek, arms folded, watching everything. Jae Hwan entered, stopped just inside the room. For a moment, no one spoke. There are silences that feel empty. This was not one of them. This silence was full of rain, full of ringing phones, full of every second between 8:03 p.m. and 3:18 a.m. when he could have chosen differently and did not. Solange looked at him, not with warmth, not with hatred, with something colder than both. Assessment, like she was looking at the version of him that remained after all the excuses had been removed. You can sit, she said. Her voice was hoarse, not weak, just changed. Jae Hwan sat in the chair beside the wall, not beside her, beside the wall, because that was where the nurse pointed, and because Phase 3 did not give him the right to decide distance. For the first 10 minutes, he said nothing. Neither did she. Nurse Beck adjusted a monitor. A cart rolled somewhere in the hallway. A patient down the corridor coughed twice. Ordinary sounds, unbearably ordinary. Then Solange shifted. A small movement. Barely anything, but pain crossed her face before she could hide it. Jae Hwan moved before he thought. 1 inch forward. That was all. Nurse Beck's eyes cut to him. He stopped, immediately. Solange saw it. Of course she did. She saw everything now. "I need the water," she said. Not to him, to the room. The bottle sat on the tray beside her chair, close enough that he could reach it, far enough that she could not. Nurse Beck did not move. This was a test, not dramatic, not announced, but real. Jae Hwan stood slowly, picked up the bottle, opened it, then stopped, because his first instinct was to place it in her hand, to act, to help, to complete the motion before she had to ask. That was who he had been, a man who believed usefulness gave him permission. Instead, he held the bottle near the tray. "May I hand it to you?" Solange looked at him. A long moment. Then she extended her right hand. Only then did he place the bottle in it. His hands trembled, not visibly to most people, but Solange saw, Nurse Beck saw, and Jae Hwan hated that they saw, not because it made him look weak, because weakness was the first honest thing his body had done in that room. Solange drank, set the bottle down. "Thank you." 2 words, formal, controlled, the kind of words you give a stranger who opens a door. And Jae Hwan understood that he had earned exactly that. No more. At minute 17, Nurse Beck stepped forward. 3 minutes. Jae Hwan nodded. Solange looked out the window. He wanted to say 100 things. "I'm sorry. I should have answered. I killed something we hadn't even named. I don't know who I am if I am not the man who can fix what he breaks." But Attorney Han's rule sat between his teeth. You will not apologize repeatedly in an attempt to receive emotional relief. So he said nothing. And then Solange spoke. "Do you know what the doctor told me?" Jae Hwan's chest tightened. "No." She was a girl. Nothing moved. Not the nurse. Not the city outside. Not even the light on the floor. "She was a girl," Solange repeated. Not louder, just clearer. "I thought you should know that." Jae Hwan lowered his eyes. For the first time since entering the room, he looked like a man who had reached the edge of language. Solange watched him. No comfort, no cruelty, just truth. "I know," he said quietly. Her expression changed, barely. "How?" He swallowed. "Dr. Park told me the second week." A pause. "I didn't ask for details they weren't authorized to give. But she said that much." Solange looked away. For a second, something moved behind her face. Not forgiveness, not softness, grief. The kind that does not care who is in the room. "What did you do with that information?" she asked. Jae Hwan looked at his hands. "I wrote it down." "Why?" "Because I was afraid if I didn't, I would let the world turn her into a consequence." The room went very still. Solange did not answer, but she did not tell him to leave. And sometimes, in a room built entirely out of boundaries, not being asked to leave is the only mercy available. When the 20 minutes ended, Jae Hwan stood. Slowly, he did not move toward her. He did not ask for more. He bowed his head once, not the formal bow of a man performing respect, a small one, almost private. "Thank you for allowing me in." Solange looked at him, then at Nurse Beck. "I'm tired." The visit was over. He left. In the hallway, he walked 10 steps, then stopped, one hand against the wall. For 45 seconds, the most feared man in Seoul's underground stood in a hospital corridor and tried to remember how to breathe without making sound. Then he straightened and walked away. That evening, Min Jun called. "Sir, Director Han wants confirmation. Mira has been telling the Busan group you're expected to return next week." Jae Hwan stood in the rented apartment kitchen, still wearing the plain gray sweater he had worn to the hospital. On the counter in front of him was the folded Phase 3 agreement. Beside it, the 200-word letter Solange had never answered. "Mira said that?" "Yes, sir." A pause. "She is positioning herself as liaison." Of course she was. Jae Hwan looked toward the window. Seoul glittered below him, all glass, money, hunger, and movement. The old world, still there, still waiting, still offering him the easiest way back into a version of himself that never had to sit in a room and ask permission to hand his wife a bottle of water. "Schedule nothing," he said. "Sir." No dinners, no calls, no private meetings. Another pause. "And Mira?" Jae Hwan looked down at the agreement, at the line about zero contact. "Cut all direct access." Min Jun was quiet. Professionally? Completely. And that was the first time Yoon Mira began to understand that the man she had built her strategy around might not be coming back. Not the way she needed him to. But people like Mira do not disappear when they lose position. They adapt. And when adaptation fails, they strike. She had one more card to play. She just hadn't decided yet how cruel she was willing to be. Solange was discharged from the hospital, but not released back into the life she had lived before. That distinction mattered, because going home and returning are not the same thing. She did not go back to the Hanam-dong estate, not to the glass walls, not to the private chef, not to the bedroom where his side of the bed had been empty too many nights before the night that finally broke everything. She rented a small serviced apartment in Seongsu. 2 rooms, 1 bathroom. A narrow balcony overlooking a street where delivery bikes passed at all hours, and no one cared who she had married. It was deliberate, modest, hers. Attorney Han handled the lease. Nurse Beck arranged the home recovery schedule. A private physical therapist came 3 mornings a week, and Solange made one rule clear before she left the hospital. Jae Hwan was not to know the address. Not yet. For 8 weeks, they did not speak directly. Every update went through Attorney Han. Every medical note was filtered. Every approved visit happened in controlled spaces, rehabilitation rooms, hospital offices, neutral ground, never her home, never without witnesses, never on his terms. Jae Hwan followed the structure. He attended counseling. He submitted 1 written message a week. He arrived when permitted. He left when told. And each time he saw her, he understood something more clearly. Solange had not built a wall because she wanted him to climb it. She had built it because she needed to live. By week 8, she could walk without the brace for short distances. Not far, not fast, but alone. And that mattered to her more than anyone around her seemed to understand. On a gray Thursday afternoon, Solange was in the hospital garden after a follow-up appointment. It was one of those quiet spaces designed to make sickness look less frightening. Stone paths, trimmed shrubs, a wooden bench, and a small maple tree still too young to offer real shade. She sat with a book in her lap. Not English, Korean. A novel she had been reading slowly, not because she couldn't understand it, but because she refused to rush anything her body had not given her permission to rush. Jae Hwan came through the side entrance on his way to a counseling session in the outpatient wing. It was not planned. That mattered, because planned meetings had rules. This one only had distance. He turned the corner and stopped. Solange looked up. For a long moment, neither of them moved. 15 feet between them, a bench, a stone path, 8 weeks of silence, 31 unanswered calls, and the ghost of a daughter who had never opened her eyes. Solange spoke first, because she was always the braver one. "You're early. Jae Hwan looked at the outpatient doors behind him. Counseling is at 3. She glanced at his watch. It's 2:20. I know. Silence. Not empty. Nothing between them was empty anymore. You've been coming, she said. It wasn't a compliment. It was an observation. Clinical, measured. Yes, even when I don't let you in. Yes, even when I return the letters unopened. Yes. She looked down at the book in her lap, then back at him. Why? He could have said 100 things. He could have apologized again. He could have explained the canceled deals, the severed access to Mira, the counseling sessions, the rented apartment, the nights he did not sleep because the sound of rain against windows made him reach for a phone that was no longer ringing. He could have told her that he had changed. But men who say they have changed usually want credit before anyone has had time to see if it is true. So he didn't say that. He said, because I wasn't there when it mattered. A pause. And I can't fix that. Solange did not look away. But I can be here now, he continued, without asking you to make it mean something, every day. Until being here is no longer something I perform, but something I become. The garden was quiet. A nurse pushed an empty wheelchair past the far path. Somewhere behind the building, an ambulance door shut. Solange studied him with the careful precision of a woman who had learned in the hardest possible way that trust without evidence was not love. It was risk. It doesn't mean something yet, she said. I know. It may never. I know that too. She closed the book. Her fingers rested on the cover for 1 second longer than necessary. Then she stood, slowly, not because she wanted help, because she refused to fall in front of him. Jae Hwan did not move, not one step. That was progress, not the kind anyone claps for, the kind that matters. Solange adjusted the sleeve of her coat, covering the edge of the tattoo on her wrist. Then she looked at him again. I didn't say you could stop coming. It was not forgiveness, not warmth, not invitation. But she had not said, don't come back. And in the language of Solange, a woman who now measured every word like currency, that silence around what she did not forbid was louder than permission. Jae Hwan bowed his head, small, controlled. Understood. She walked back toward the hospital doors. He stayed where he was until she disappeared inside. Only then did he breathe. Jae Hwan's counselor was a man named Dr. Min Tae-woong, a clinical psychologist who specialized in high-controlled personalities, executives, military officers, men with money, men with silence, and, though he would never confirm it publicly, men whose names appeared in rooms where normal people did not get invited. Dr. Min did not impress easily. He did not flatter. He did not treat power as a reason to speak softly. And by their 10th session, he had stopped letting Jae Hwan circle the thing he did not want to touch. Let's talk about the night of the accident. Jae Hwan sat across from him. Still, controlled. We've talked about it. No, Dr. Min said. We've talked about the timeline. We've talked about the calls. We've talked about the consequences. A pause. We have not talked about the decision. Jae Hwan's jaw shifted. Why did you stay? The Busan agreement was effectively closed before 10, Dr. Min said. Your assistant confirmed that. You stayed until after 3. He leaned forward slightly. The deal does not explain those hours. Silence. So I'll ask again. A pause. Why did you stay? Jae Hwan looked at the window behind Dr. Min. Seoul stretched beyond it. bright and busy and indifferent. Was it Yoon Mira? More silence. Mr. Jae Hwan, you have followed every condition placed in front of you. You have attended every session. You have shown up at the hospital, followed the rules, accepted limits most men in your position would have tried to destroy. Dr. Min's voice stayed even. But if you cannot answer this question honestly, then all of that is only discipline. A pause. And discipline is not the same thing as change. Jae Hwan did not move, but something in his face shifted. Not much. Enough. At the lounge, he said finally. I was easy. Dr. Min waited. Jae Hwan's voice was lower than it had been in any previous session. At the lounge, I knew who I was. People needed me, feared me, read me before I spoke. Every glass, every chair, every silence in that room was arranged around my importance. A pause. With Mira, I did not have to be a husband. There it was, not the whole truth, but the door to it. She reflected back the version of me I understood, he continued. The one without weakness, without age, without fear, without a wife who saw through every polished thing I used to hide behind. Dr. Min did not interrupt. Solange saw me, Jae Hwan said. The words came slower now. She always did. A pause. She knew I was pulling away before I knew I was doing it. She knew the power was easier for me than the marriage. She knew I liked being needed by everyone except the one person who actually needed me to be present. His throat moved. He looked down at his hands. And that night, when her name appeared on my phone, he stopped. The room held still around him. I knew. Dr. Min's eyes stayed on him. I didn't know about the accident. I didn't know she was bleeding. I didn't know about the baby. A pause. But I knew she needed me. The silence after that was different, heavier, because some confessions do not become powerful because they are dramatic. They become powerful because they remove the last excuse. I stayed, Jae Hwan said, because answering meant going back to being responsible for someone I had already failed too many times. It meant hearing pain in her voice and knowing I had no elegant way to manage it. No staff, no money, no solution. His voice cracked. Not loudly, not cinematically, just enough to make the truth visible. I knew how to close deals. I knew how to move men. I knew how to make rooms quiet. A pause. I did not know how to sit beside my wife while she was afraid and simply stay. Dr. Min said nothing. She called me 31 times, Jae Hwan whispered, and I turned the phone over. He closed his eyes. When she stopped calling, I thought the moment had passed. A pause. I didn't understand that I was the one who had passed it. For the first time, Jae Hwan did not sound like a man describing what happened. He sounded like a man standing inside it. And our daughter died, he said. The word daughter nearly broke him. He held it anyway. She died before I knew her name, before Solange could hold her, before I could become anything better than the man who stayed at a table because he was afraid to go home. Dr. Min let the silence sit. He knew better than to rescue men from the first honest pain they had ever earned. Finally, Jae Hwan said, Solange believed I would answer. A pause. She believed in a version of me that did not exist yet. His voice dropped, and I let her bleed alone because I was too cowardly to become him. That confession, raw, quiet, stripped of the authority that had shaped his entire life, was the first real thing Jae Hwan had built in years. Not a deal, not a strategy, not a performance of regret. just the truth. Ugly, heavy, necessary, and it was the foundation everything after would have to stand on. Solange did not forgive him. Not that day, not that week, maybe not ever, but she saw him. And for Jae Hwan, a man who had lost the right to be believed, being seen was more than he deserved. She survived, but not for him, because power can open doors. Money can rebuild what breaks. Fear can make people answer. But trust, real trust, only returns one day at a time, if it returns at all. If this story reached you, subscribe to Seoul Midnight Lore, turn on notifications, and tell me in the comments, if you were Solange, would you have opened the door again? Or would you have left him outside forever? Because the next story begins with a woman who did open the door. And by sunrise, she understood some men don't come back to love you. They come back to finish what they started. This is our Seoul Midnight Lore. And every love story we tell here leaves a scar.